Hello, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International. Good evening, CJ.
Good evening, Alma, and good evening to everyone joining the broadcast. Here are the headlines.
A prop gun. U.S. actor Alec Baldwin has accidentally shot two crewmen when fired a prop gun that killed cinematographer and wounded the director on a film set in New Mexico.
The United States will defend Taiwan if China attacks it, President Joe Biden says, prompting a warning from Beijing that its determination to take back the democratic island should not be underestimated.
The pandemic is a
The WHO said that 80,000 to 180,000 healthcare workers may have been killed by COVID-19 up to May this year.
And Swedish rapper Einar, who won awards and top charts in the Scandinavian country, was shot and killed late Thursday in Stockholm.
Från när jag var 10 tills nu, jag har lyssnat på Sebbe alla mina år, så det.
U.S. actor Alec Baldwin has accidentally shot two crewmen when he fired a prop gun that killed a cinematographer and wounded the director in a film set in Mexico. Taliana Hutchins and Joel Souza were shot when a prop firearm was discharged by Alec Baldwin, according to the sheriff in Santa Fe in a statement. Hutchins, 42, was transported to a hospital by helicopter but died of the wounds, while Souza, 48, was taken by ambulance and is receiving treatment. The incident took place on the set of Rust, where Baldwin is playing the lead in a 19th century Western about an accidental killing. The paper said its reporter had seen the actor in tears after he had been questioned by investigators. Baldwin has been on television and in film since the 1980s. He starred in a number of high-profile movies, including In the Hunt for Red October and two iterations of the Mission Impossible franchise, and has also voiced animated characters in hits like The Boss Baby. He garnered new fans with his long-running portrayal of Donald Trump on Saturday Night Live, a character that irritated the former president, but won Baldwin a Primetime Emmy. The shooting took place, meanwhile, at the Bonanza Creek Ranch, a production location near Santa Fe, which is popular with Hollywood filmmakers. Movie sets usually have stringent rules over the use of prop weapons, but accidents have happened. Most famously, Brandon Lee, the son of martial arts legend Bruce Lee, died during the filming of The Crow after being shot by a gun that was supposed to fire blanks.
Human remains found in a Florida nature reserve belong to the boyfriend of murdered road tripper Gabby Petito, according to authorities on Thursday. The FBI said in a statement that a comparison of dental records confirmed that the human remains are those of Brian Laundrie. Laundrie, 23, had been named a person of interest in the killing of Petito, 22 years old, who was found dead in September after the couple went on a road trip across the United States. Petito had quit her job in New York and packed her life into a camper van for a cross-country adventure with Laundrie over the summer, documenting their journey in a stream of social media posts. But her family filed a missing person report on September 11 after Petito mysteriously vanished and Laundrie returned home to Florida without her. Laundrie refused to say what happened to his girlfriend and then vanished himself as authorities launched a nationwide search for Petito. Petito's body was found in the wilderness of Wyoming on September 19, and investigators determined she had been strangled. The grim discovery and identification of Laundrie's body brings the week-long manhunt to a close. But questions about his final days remain, and investigators hope that the note that they found will help him or will help them piece together the story.
Meanwhile, 15 people died as a result of a fire at a Russian explosives factory southeast of Moscow on Friday, according to local authorities. The government of the Ryazan region, where the factory is based, said 15 people died. One person has been seriously burned and is in critical condition. It also said one more person is missing. Earlier, it said the fire could have broken out as a result of violations of the technological processes and safety measures at the PGUP Elastic factory in the Ryazan region. The plant says on its website that it produces industrial explosives for civilian use, but also ammunition for the defense sector, as well as gas generators for submarines. The official toll from the incident was expected to rise, with a source telling the Interfax news agency that 16 people had died.
Swedish rapper Einar, who won awards and top charts in the Scandinavian country, was shot and killed late Thursday in Stockholm, according to police and media, as police hunted for suspects. The 19-year-old, who raps in Swedish, was the most streamed artist on Spotify in Sweden in 2019. He was shot several times outside an apartment building shortly before 11 p.m. or 2100 GMT. Ambulance personnel administered first aid, but he died at the scene, according to Stockholm police spokeswoman Tohag to AFP. Police have opened a murder investigation. Many of Einar's songs reference a life of crime, including drugs and weapons. He had public feuds with rival artist Yasin, who in July was jailed for 10 months for his role in a 2020 kidnapping of Einar. Einar started posting songs on social media as a young teenager and had his breakthrough in 2019 when he released the song Katten I Trakten, or The Cat in the Area, which made it to #1 on the Swedish singles chart. He won several music awards, including Swedish Grammys. Sweden has in recent years struggled to combat rising shootings and bombings by gangs and organized crime.
Meanwhile, the United States will defend Taiwan if China attacks it, that according to President Joe Biden, prompting a warning from Beijing on Friday that its determination to take back the democratic island should not be underestimated. At a CNN town hall, Biden was asked whether the U.S. would come to Taiwan's defense if China invaded. Yes, he responded, we have a commitment to that. Biden's statement was at odds with the long-held U.S. policy known as strategic ambiguity, where Washington helps build Taiwan's defenses but does not explicitly promise to come to the island's help in the event of a war. President Biden made a similar pledge in August during an interview with ABC, insisting that the U.S. would always defend key allies, including Taiwan, despite the withdrawal from Afghanistan in the face of victorious Taliban.
China urges Washington to tread carefully on Taiwan after President Joe Biden said the U.S. would defend the self-ruled island from attacks by Beijing. Take a look.
在涉及中国主权和领土完整等核心利益问题上，中方没有任何妥协退让余地。任何人不要低估中国人民捍卫国家主权和领土完整的坚强决心、坚定意志和强大能力。不要站在14亿中国人民的对立面。
In other news, Israel's Prime Minister Naftali Bennett meets in Russia with President Vladimir Putin for the first time for talks expected to focus on Iran. Now, the visit may be one of Putin's last face-to-face meeting with a foreign leader before Russia's new COVID restrictions comes into force next week. Take a look.
Я очень надеюсь, что несмотря на внутриполитические баталии, они неизбежны для каждого государства, все-таки в части российско-израильских отношений ваше правительство будет проводить политику преемственности. С прежним правительством у нас сложились достаточно деловые и доверительные отношения.
היחסים עם רוסיה, שבימים אלה אנחנו מציינים 30 שנה לכינונם, הם יחסים מיוחדים מאוד, גם בגלל העבר וגם בגלל ההווה והעתיד. שאתה הובלת ב-20 השנים האחרונות את הקשר הזה, ואני יכול לומר לך בשם אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו רואים בך ידיד אמת של העם היהודי.
Last week, Bennett's office said the pair will discuss Iran's nuclear program. Moscow is one of the signatories to a 2015 deal that saw sanctions relief for Iran in exchange for limits to its nuclear capability. Former U.S. President Donald Trump withdrew from the deal in 2018 and reimposed harsh sanctions, leading Tehran to gradually roll back its commitments under the agreement. Bennett told the United Nations General Assembly last month that Israel will not allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon.
The leader of a Haitian gang who kidnapped a group of Northern Americans over the weekend has threatened to execute them, according to a video seen by AFP. The footage shot Wednesday but released Thursday on social media showed Wilson Joseph wearing a suit and surrounded by armed men in front of coffins containing the bodies of 5 members of his gang. A senior U.S. official speaking on condition of anonymity said the video appeared to be genuine. The kidnappers are demanding $17 million ransom for the hostages. Freedom and security sources have told that to AFP. On Saturday, the group of 17 U.S. and Canadian missionaries and their children were kidnapped in broad daylight while on a visit to an orphanage in the heart of an area in eastern Port-au-Prince, which is under control of the gang. The Ohio-based Christian Aid Ministries, to which the abducted missionaries belong, said the group included 12 adults aged 18 to 48, along with 5 children aged 8 months, 3, 6, 13, and 15.
The news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
This portion is brought to you by North Luzon Express Terminal.
Makabuluhang talakayan.
Sapat na po ba yun? Papasok yung 30% sa indoor, 50% sa outdoor, para to even break even? Ilang pong mga negosyo ang nagsara po dahil dito po sa pandemya?
Malalim na komentaryo.
Ngayon, sinasabi yung essential goods and services. Pero nakita naman po natin sa Dolomite Beach. At may time clock yung mga bata doon.
Umaapaw sa impormasyon.
Ano ba ngayon ang allotted budget per voter? Yung hindi daw bakunado po ng mga empleyado, hindi sila pinapasweldo. Oras!
Pero hindi rin nagpapahuli sa kakulitan.
Merong nag-file for the presidency. Hinimok daw siya ng mga alien at ang kanyang plataforma po ay palakasin ang Wi-Fi. At ito si Ali magde-demonstrate paano mag-swimming na may face mask.
Kaya, nood na kina Ali Soto at Pati Daza sa ASPN. Ano sa palagay nyo?
Kung kayo po ay may pinagdadaanan, daanan nyo lang. Huwag niyong tambayan.
Lunes hanggang Biyernes, alas 8 hanggang alas 10 ng umaga.
Oras, alas 9:26 na po ng umaga at nagbabalik po ang ASPS.
Mapapanood sa Net25 at mapapakinggan sa DZEC, Radyo Aguila at Eagle FM 95.5.
Welcome back. Amber Hill Capital Director Jackson Wong said that Evergrande did not follow the rules set out by Beijing. He said China made Evergrande an example to show that you will face consequences if you don't follow their rules. Take a look.
I think China made Evergrande as an example by violating their rules, which is the famous 3 red lines. They rolled out, I think, in 2019. So there's a year and some time for all the developers to follow, but Evergrande did not follow the rules. Now they made Evergrande as an example to show that if you don't follow the rules, you will face the consequences. So in my opinion, it has to have someone with a very huge power, or I wouldn't name anyone, but it has to be orchestrated by the government in order for them to compromise on the price, so that the buyers will have a guarantee from the government, and the seller would comply with since Evergrande is in this situation. If you don't comply, then they might face bankruptcy. Well, probably not directly, but they will direct some other companies, similar size or with good behavior before, that would try to form a syndicate to buy out their assets piece by piece. There's no way for one company, since Evergrande is already the top, it's not the top one, it's top 3. There's no way another company can come in and buy with huge debts that will put them in a dangerous situation. So it's very likely the government will ask a syndicate of companies to buy out their assets piece by piece at a cheap price, so that everyone will be happy, or everyone can get out of this situation. I wouldn't say safely, but at least with something. I think for Evergrande's situation, a lot of people will say, will compare whether it's like the Lehman Brothers moment. I would say it's not exactly true, because Evergrande does not have a huge exposure around the world. However, it has a huge exposure within China, especially in the property sector.
In a related news, China's troubled property giant Evergrande has made a key offshore interest payment a day ahead of a weekend deadline, averting a default and buying the embattled company a reprieve as it struggles under a mountain of debt. Evergrande is reported to have missed at least $150 million in offshore bond payments, and while it had a 30-day grace period on some of them, there had been a general expectation it would not be able to meet its obligations. However, on Friday, the state-backed Securities Times said the developer had wired $83.5 million for an overseas payment first due on September 23, citing relevant channels. It said bondholders would receive the payout before Saturday, the end of the grace period. Had the deadline been missed, the Evergrande would have plunged into formal default. The crisis at one of the nation's biggest property developers has hammered investor sentiment, rattled the key real estate market, and fueled fears of a spillover into the wider economy.
Back here in the country, the domestic economy still needs sustained monetary policy support as inflation remains elevated and growth is still fragile due to the impact of the pandemic and other international factors. Here's Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, Governor Benjamin Diokno in a speech during the 2021 third quarter inflation report briefing streamed through the central bank's Facebook page. Let's listen in.
The 2021 third quarter inflation report, which was released on Thursday, was the 11th consecutive quarter of decline. Inflation remains elevated, and growth is still fragile due to the impact of the pandemic and other international factors. Here's Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, Governor Benjamin Diokno in a speech during the 2021 third quarter inflation report briefing streamed through the central bank's Facebook page. Let's listen in. Accordingly, private economists surveyed by the BSP expect inflation to remain slightly above the government's target range of 2 to 4% in 2021. Nonetheless, analysts expect inflation to settle close to the midpoint of the target range in 2022 and 2023, consistent with the BSP's latest projections of 3.3% in 2022 and 3.2% in 2023. In response to the manageable inflation environment, the BSP maintained its accommodative monetary policy settings during the third quarter of 2021, mainly to sustain the economy's nascent recovery. We expect inflation to gradually ease, even as the risk to the outlook lean toward the upside for the rest of the year. Inflationary pressures may continue to emanate from rising international commodity prices, the potential effects of recent weather disturbances, and a possible prolonged recovery from the African swine fever outbreak. Against this backdrop, continued monetary policy support remains crucial in supporting private demand and encouraging banks to lend and thereby allow the economic recovery to gain more traction. At the same time, further traction from non-monetary government interventions to directly address supply-side inflation pressures also provide flexibility to monetary authorities in preserving policy support for the economy. Looking ahead, the continued decline in COVID-19 infection cases owing to the speedier vaccine rollout and more effective granular lockdown will help underpin the economy's gradual reopening. Equally important, continued fiscal support, widespread access to vaccines, and appropriate containment strategies will remain critical in boosting productivity and restoring the economy's overall growth trajectory.
Relatively, Diokno said central banks in advanced economies have started reassessing their respective monetary policy settings vis-a-vis the impact of upticks in global commodity prices due to improvement in demand as well as the supply bottlenecks. The BSP, however, is confident that the Philippines is well placed to recover over with a possible tightening of global financial conditions, he said, citing that the central bank still has a full range of policy tools at their disposal.
Back to the pandemic news, the WHO said Thursday that 80,000 to 180,000 healthcare workers may have been killed by COVID-19 up to May this year, insisting they must be prioritized for vaccination.
The pandemic is a powerful demonstration of just how much we rely on health workers and how vulnerable we all are when the people who protect our health are themselves unprotected. A new WHO working paper estimates that 115,000 health workers may have died from COVID-19 between January 2020 and May this year. That's why it's essential that health workers are prioritized for vaccination. Data from 119 countries suggests that on average, 2 in 5 health and care workers globally are fully vaccinated. But of course, that average masks huge differences across regions and economic groupings. In Africa, less than 1 in 10 health workers have been fully vaccinated. Meanwhile, in most high-income countries, more than 80% of health workers are fully vaccinated. More than 10 months since the first vaccines were approved, the fact that millions of health workers still haven't been vaccinated is an indictment on the countries and companies that control the global supply of vaccines. High and upper middle income countries have now administered almost half as many booster shots as the total number of vaccines administered in low income countries. In 10 days' time, 20 people will meet in Rome with the ability to change that, the leaders of the G20 countries. Between now and then, roughly 500 million vaccine doses will be produced. That's the amount of additional doses we need to achieve our target of vaccinating 40% of the population of every country by the end of the year. 82 countries are at risk of missing that target.
In a call for concrete action to better protect health and care workers worldwide from COVID-19 and other infections, the WHO and partner organizations expressed concern at the large numbers of health and care workers who have died from the virus, but also that an increasing proportion is suffering from burnout, stress, anxiety, and fatigue. The novel coronavirus has killed at least 4.9 million people since the outbreak emerged in China in December 2019, according to a tally from official sources compiled by AFP, while nearly 242 million cases have been registered.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister of Thailand said that the country will let vaccinated visitors from 46 countries forgo COVID quarantine from next month, up from 10 previously announced. Here's Gila Pablo joining us live to tell us more. Hello, Gila.
Yes, hello, Alma. Good evening. And again, Thai Premier Prayut Chan-o-cha announced Thursday that vaccinated travelers from more than 40 countries will be allowed to enter the kingdom without undergoing quarantine come November 1, as it readies for a much-anticipated reopening. The 46 countries and territories is a significant jump from the 10 initially announced last week by Prayut when he unveiled plans to reopen the country next month. The ballooning list is due to Thailand's urgent need to stimulate the tourism sector and other related business sectors, stated by Prayut. Beside the United States, Britain, and China, vaccinated tourists from a slew of European countries, including France and Germany, will be allowed in if they are able to provide a negative COVID RT-PCR test. Neighbors Cambodia and Malaysia are also on the low-risk list, as well as Singapore, Japan, South Korea, and Hong Kong. Upon landing in Thailand, travelers will have to take another COVID test and book a single night in a government-approved hotel while awaiting the results before being allowed to travel freely. Before the pandemic, Thailand attracted nearly 40 million visitors, with tourism making up almost 20% of its national income. Last year, the country lost about $50 billion in tourism revenue as foreign arrivals plunged 83% to 6.7 million. Prayut had initially said earlier this year that 70% of all Thais must be vaccinated before the kingdom fully reopened its borders. To date, nearly 40% have received 2 vaccine doses. Thailand is also still registering about 10,000 cases per day, largely fueled by the highly contagious Delta variant. The country has more than 1.8 million cases to date and has recorded 18,559 deaths. Back to you, Alma.
Thank you very much, Gila, for your update there in Thailand. Stay safe.
Same to you, Alma. I'm Gila Pablo reporting live from Bangkok, Thailand. We live in interesting times.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson insists he is sticking with COVID Plan A, despite warnings from leading doctors that it would be willfully negligent to not implement Plan B immediately. Let's find out more from Janelle Ann Kasuga of our EBC UK Bureau.
Let's listen in.
Well, we're continuing with the plan that we set out in July, which was itself an extension of the roadmap that began in February. And yes, we're watching the numbers very carefully every day. And yes, you're absolutely right, Tracy, the numbers of infections are high. But we're within the parameters.
On Wednesday, the British government rejected calls to trigger Plan B measures to limit spiralling COVID infection rates, even as it warned that cases could reach as many as 100,000 a day over the winter months. Let's listen in.
Well, we're continuing with the plan that we set out in July, which was itself an extension of the roadmap that began in February. And yes, we're watching the numbers very carefully every day. And yes, you're absolutely right, Tracy, the numbers of infections are high. But we're within the parameters of what the predictions were. We're sticking with our plan. I think the most important thing people can do now is just get that booster jab. You get the call, get the jab. We've done about 4 million booster jabs already, but as soon as you become eligible, as soon as you get that call, everybody over 50 should be getting that jab.
Their leaders have urged the government to reinstate some restrictions to prevent the close contact spread of the coronavirus, including the wearing of masks indoors to ease pressure on hospitals. However, Health Secretary Sajid Javid played down concerns about the stubbornly high figures, which are nudging 50,000 new cases and 1,000 hospital admissions a day. Javid said winter, during which health services are typically stretched with other seasonal viruses such as influenza, will pose the greatest threat to our recovery. He later added that this pandemic is not over, but we will stay vigilant, preparing for all eventualities while strengthening our vital defences that can help us fight back against the virus. Matthew Taylor, the head of the NHS Confederation, representing the state-run health service in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, said hospitals were feeling severe pressure and action was needed during the cold weather starting in earnest. Worsening COVID-19 rates were affecting key targets in areas such as waits in emergency departments, ambulance response times and treatment backlogs. The government has faced repeated criticisms for reacting too slowly at key stages of the pandemic since early last year. Britain's death toll exceeds 139,000, second only to Russia in Europe. Ministers lifted coronavirus restrictions in July as vaccination rates increased, hoping to kickstart much-needed economic recovery. The current rise in cases has been attributed to high numbers of infections in school-aged children who returned to the classroom after a disrupted year in September. But ministers maintain the situation does not yet warrant a return to compulsory indoor mask wearing and working from home when possible, among other restrictions. According to the latest figures on Wednesday, 7,891 people were in hospital with COVID-19, including 850 on ventilation. A total of 179 had died within 28 days of a positive test. The government is urging that over 50s and clinically vulnerable to take up the offer of a third booster vaccine to give further protection, as well as get flu jabs. It also signed a deal for 730,000 antiviral drugs from pharma giants Pfizer and Merck, which, subject to regulatory approval, will speed up recovering times and stop infection progressing. Britain's high infection rates, currently the second highest in the world after the United States, according to Johns Hopkins University, contrast sharply with its European neighbours. That has prompted fresh scrutiny of the decision to relax all restrictions. Britain began its vaccination program in December last year, raising questions about whether immunity is now waning. Reporting from London, United Kingdom, I'm Janelle Kasuga. We live in interesting times.
Thank you, Janelle. Meanwhile, back here in the country, the Metropolitan Manila Development Authority, or MMDA, reiterated that individuals below 18 years old are allowed outdoors but only for individual exercise and essential purposes. MMDA chairperson Benar Abalos said this in the Thursday Palace briefing amid a national capital region's de-escalation to alert level 3, which eases restrictions to allow more economic activities. Take a look.
Menor de edad, bawal pa rin po ang gala ng mga kabataan except po for outdoor exercises.
Well, ganito po yan, no? Kaya may mga alert levels po tayo ay para lang makalibrate natin unti-unti. Kamukha sa malls, pupunta sa malls. Well, generally, bawal po iyan. Except kung, let's say, andun yung dentista, andun yung clinic, hindi ba? Because these are essential or basic.
Abalos said intrazonal and interzonal travel is also allowed but is subject to age and comorbidities-based restrictions determined by local government units. Meanwhile, Malacanang said local government units outside Metro Manila under the expanded alert level system implementation were consulted amid appeals to defer its implementation in provinces. The government has yet to issue a conclusion on the initial pilot tests, but presidential spokesperson Harry Roque said it should have not been expanded if there were no improvements in COVID cases and hospital utilization.
The United States, through the COVAX facility, will deliver another 2 million doses of the coronavirus or COVID-19 vaccine to the Philippines by next week. That, according to the U.S. Embassy in Manila, Heather Variava on Thursday night. Variava also said Pfizer is one of the safest and effective, most effective vaccines in the U.S., and it has already been used in the vaccination of 10 million children. Watch this.
We have vaccinated more than 10 million children in the United States with a Pfizer vaccine. My son is one of them, in fact. He's a teenager, and so it is a very safe and effective vaccine for children. And we're seeing that also now here in the Philippines with very good results.
Vaccination for children in Metro Manila started in some selected hospitals last October 15.
Meanwhile, a palace advisor wants to make mandatory the vaccination against COVID-19 among workers in labor-intensive and high-risk businesses. Presidential Advisor for Entrepreneurship and Go Negosyo founder Joey Concepcion said that he has written to Labor Secretary Silvestre Bello III proposing the mandatory COVID jabs for specific workers. Take a look.
First of all, at this point in time, the employers are not implementing anything like that, no? No job, no pay, no? That's not being done, especially with all of those who bought, no? We have checked, nobody's doing that. I don't think it's correct na bakunado lang ang customer namin exclusively and yung empleyado namin ay hindi bakunado.
The global common of saving the humanity is much higher than the individual right. We have to know if the individual has the right to refuse for vaccination. I believe also the companies have the right to preserve its institution from being contaminated with the virus.
Na AstraZeneca vaccines ang lumapag sa NAIA Terminal 1 na binili ng nasa private sector.
On Friday morning, Concepcion and National Task Force Against COVID Chief Secretary Carlito Galvez welcomed the arrival of 698,600 doses of AstraZeneca vaccines procured by the private sector under the Dose of Hope program at NAIA Airport.
Buckingham Palace said Queen Elizabeth II spent a night in hospital for tests after being forced to cancel a visit to Northern Ireland this week. Britain's Domestic Press Association news agency said the trip to hospital had been kept under wraps because it was expected to be a short stay and also to protect the 95-year-old monarch's privacy. The overnight stay was for practical reasons. She was given medical advice to rest for a few days after a busy schedule of public engagements. News that she had an overnight stay in hospital will inevitably raise fears for her health, given her advanced age, and questions about whether she should slow down further. Next year, she is due to celebrate her Platinum Jubilee to mark 70 years on the throne.
And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
Events happen around us all the time, in our community, in our country, around the world. Events that affect people, move communities, or simply inspire us. Interesting events that people need to know. In these interesting times, we continue to be a competent partner in delivering news about these events. Fast, accurate, balanced. Eagle News, because we live in interesting times.
Back to the news. Developers in Florida have begun building the world's first pandemic-ready skyscraper, which will integrate the Miami World Center complex with a price tag of $500 million. The Legacy Tower is planned to contain 310 luxurious residences, 219 hotel rooms, and more. Let's take a look.
Legacy Hotel and Residences was being designed during the pandemic. And so during that time, we decided to make some adjustments to the project. Since the project has a residential hotel and medical wellness component to it, we decided to expand some of the wellness features throughout the rest of the project. We looked at the ventilation systems. We looked at antimicrobial material throughout. We looked at Xenix robots. These are robots that kill bacteria that we could use for cleanliness.
From the minute, again, you come into the elevators, your touchless technology, you have an air purification system, you have the ability to have a medical center right there. So if anything happens to you, you can just go down your elevator and walk across the hall and basically say, can I get a checkup, right? And I think that speaks a lot to people, just as simple as that.
Finally, in our news, Iglesia Ni Cristo members in Ottawa participate in a cleanup drive as part of the Glad Cleaning the Capital. Ross Castro reports.
The City of Ottawa holds Glad Cleaning Up the Capital to benefit communities, city parks, and streets. This is a citywide campaign every spring and fall. Residents come together as a community, keeping cities clean and green.
This year marks the 20th year of the program. As leaves start to dry up and fall, the dried leaves and branches accumulate on the ground, and this may bring mold and pests in the area. Cleaning during fall season prepares parks and community areas for spring, preventing lawn damage.
Volunteers from a local church in Ottawa, the Iglesia Ni Cristo Church of Christ, are some of the participants. They have been a part of this program for 15 years now and have cleaned most areas of Ottawa.
Bags of trash, litter, and dried leaves were collected today. Confederation Park Councillor Teresa Kavanagh acknowledges the INC Giving volunteers through a letter of appreciation. Councillor Keith Eglay, meanwhile, extends his appreciation to the volunteers through a video greeting.
Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to take this opportunity to thank all the volunteers in the church for the great work that they do each and every day in the community. It's especially important, I think, to thank you for all the great volunteer work that you have done while COVID has been in our city.
The INC Giving Project is initiated by the Church of Christ, or Iglesia ni Cristo, to help our community. And in this case, we did a cleanup drive here in Confederation Park in Ottawa, Canada. And the aim of this project by the Church of Christ is to help our community, brethren inside the Church of Christ, even those who are non-members, join this initiative to further influence others in helping out in the community and even to our fellow men all over the world.
For Eagle News Ottawa, this is Rosalie Castro. We live in interesting times.
Thanks so much, Ross. And that's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I am CJ Hero. The news continues tomorrow. Happy weekend, everyone.
And at the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. We'll see you back tomorrow at 11. I'm Alma Angeles, and
we live in interesting times.
Thank you.